Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Ferrari, your host for today's webinar and the Digital Marketing Manager at Modulus. It's my pleasure to welcome you to an especially timely webinar titled Operationalizing the UI Act, How to Start Getting Ready Today. Indeed, the timing couldn't be more pertinent. Just a few hours ago, the European Parliament approved the UI Act. And now you might be wondering, what does this mean for me and my organization? Or how do we ensure compliance? Or what are our next steps? Or maybe this is the first time that we are hearing about the approval of the UI Act. Regardless of where you stand, I think you have come to the right place. Because today, we are lucky to have a panel of amazing speakers who will address these questions and more. So let's introduce our speakers. Of course, ladies first. Sorry, guys. So welcome Elena Maran. Elena Maran is a former financial services executive with more than 13 years experience. Elena is now Global Head Financial Services at Modulus, defining the strategy, capturing requirements, and driving growth in the sector. She's helping financial institutions embrace responsible AI governance and align with global and sector-relevant AI regulations. Instead, now, welcome to our guest, Peter Hense. Peter Hense is head of the data, IT, and technology team at Spirit Legal in Germany. He specializes in international IT and technology law, data protection, and litigation. He focuses on advertising technology, sensor data, machine learning, and the ethics of automated decision-making systems. And last but not least, welcome to Kevin Chavinsky. So Kevin Chavinsky was a professor of astrophysics, but now he's currently driving the mission to develop and operate AI products and services in a new regulated environment. As the co-founder and CEO of Modulus, he's deeply engaged in crafting and championing responsible and trustworthy AI solutions. So welcome again to all of you. Thanks to be here today with us. And before we start with the discussion, I just want to say one more thing to our attendees. Please, if you have some questions, write the questions in the chat here on LinkedIn, because at the end we will have a Q&A session and I will read the questions for you. So I think that I said everything. We can start. And actually, I would like to ask you, Kevin, if you can maybe provide an introductory overview of the current state of the UI Act, and then we will move on the discussion with you, Elena and Peter. So Kevin, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody to our webinar, which we'd originally just planned for the state and ended up being right after the vote, today's historic vote in the EU Parliament, by accident because of the EU moved the vote forward, which I think in part is actually a signal to how serious the EU sees its mission to regulate AI and to set down some ground rules for how AI is used in products and services. Now, we also know that the EU has the ambition to make the global rules for AI, and therefore making the AI Act similar to other laws like GDPR, actually an extraterritorial regulation. So based on that, we've built a panel here with Peter and with Elena of experts who can talk about the topic of what this really means for organizations today. What does it mean now that we've entered the AI Act area for an organization to operate AI responsibly and in line with the law? And with that setup, I want to put the question first to Peter. What does it mean for an organization starting today? What new obligations do they have? How should we categorize them? And what does it mean to get ready? And as the title says, operationalize what this law now requires.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Elena, and everyone here organizing this event. It's definitely not easy to answer the question that you just asked me. Why is it not easy? Because they just published the latest version of the compromise text of the AI Act. And to be honest, this text, this act, this piece of legislation, it started quite as a comprehensive and kind of easy to understand product liability, product safety regulation in 21. And it now ended up to like being one of the kind of the longest piece of text, and with sometimes taking the weirdest turns that I've ever seen in European legislation. It's far more complex than GDPR. It's enormously long and complicated and tries to solve a couple of things that seem to not be like solvable, at least at first sight. Quoting from the subject matter, the purpose of the regulation was to improve the functioning of the internal market. Sounds good, right? And promoting the uptake of human-centric and trustworthy artificial intelligence. Trustworthy artificial intelligence, there we start. What is artificial intelligence? What is trustworthy? No one actually knows. There are definitions. So by law, we should know what falls under artificial intelligence, but what trustworthy is. The opinions may vary a lot. And just thinking in terms of what are the concrete applications in companies or institutions at the moment, like using certain services through an API, because that's what it is. It's about the big models providing output to your input, using those big models, the market dominant players being OpenAI and Meta and Anthropic and others. There are also smaller players, of course. You could have your own model deployed in your own system, but let's stick with the API access, because that's what most companies would do and develop their own stuff on top of the API. The thing is, you could be a manufacturer, you could be a provider, you could be an importer, a distributor, or deployer. The terminology already of that shows us that they are still thinking in steels and in bricks, but not in data, because to data, all of that, like, it sounds weirdly from like something from the 19th century, a distinction that doesn't make much sense. And I can tell you why it doesn't make much sense. If you deploy a local model at your institution, if you fine tune a model, if you use, if you're creating an app and you connect that app through an API, you will always be a distributor of a product. You might also be a manufacturer because you did something that goes beyond fine-tuning or retrieval augmented generation to have a database set up in your company. But basically, all the obligations, the moment you start doing something really useful with your system, you will have the full obligations under the AI Act if you are creating a high-risk system. What is high risk? That's definitely something to talk about, and there is no clear answer to that, because high risk is being defined under the law. There are certain triggers, product safety triggers. If you're basically creating something that also falls under the medical device directive, then this would trigger automatically that your system is high risk. But also there are other triggers there in the law, depending on the field you're active in, the field you want to deploy your system to. And then you would have to do a risk assessment if you want to avoid creating or like following all the new obligations. Some of the obligations are not easy to fulfill, like proper documentation and creating logs for every event. I mean, who has the manpower, the people in place to do all of that? Not an SME, and not even most of the multinationals. They are still trying to find the workforce available for doing that. So there are a lot of obligations. Existing laws still apply. So it's a sectoral application, but there we have a lot of other laws, from GDPR to Product Liability Directive to machine regulation. So in the end, it's gonna be a huge burden, especially for SMEs. We could dive into the details if you want, but that's like the overall perspective from the lawyers, from the legal experts in the field. So considering this is kind of the moon landing for the European Union, one small step for the EU, and a giant leap ahead for mankind. So we'll see about that.
Thank you, Peter. I'm sure there's a lot of jumping off points for questions and discussions just from that introduction. One of the things that the AI Act does is it's a risk-based assessment, and as a law, it mandates risk management. So, of course, we have Elena Maran here with us, who used to do risk management in a financial services institution. And Elena, of course, now with her work with us, with Modulus, has learned about and become an expert in risk management for AI. So maybe for our audience here, can you talk a little bit about the difference between, let's call it classical risk management, and what the AI Act now envisions that institutions engage in?
Sure. Thank you, Kevin, for the question, which is something I'm very passionate about, given my past, as you already mentioned. Well, there are fundamental differences between what's the traditional risk management and risk management of AI. First of all, the nature of the technology. Artificial intelligence is a dynamic type of process. You need to understand what's happening in an AI application from inception all the way to retirement. And the risk can arise at each and every point of this life cycle. Second of all, the competencies of a risk manager are often focused on a specific topic. Like I was an expert in credit risk, for example. Other person in the bank would be more about liquidity risk, operational risk, market risk. Now with AI, within a same application, there are risks of different nature that can arise. Risk related to the potential of discrimination, risk related to the potential breaching of data privacy, or a risk related to cybersecurity. So a person that does risk management for AI shall possess all the skills to understand the technology, its dynamic nature, and also different type of risks. And the assessment of this risk is something that goes well beyond what traditional risk management does, because you need to be able to understand what are the factors generating that risk and translating those factors, aggregating them into corporate KPIs that often boil down to a monetary amount or an impact to the asset of the company. So as you can see, the complexity are much broader than traditional risk management, because you can think of visualizing the risks in a matrix where on the one side you have the life cycle stages of an AI application, and on the other side you have the stages of the risk management process that go from the identification to the treatment to the monitoring and to the reporting of risk. And inside this matrix, you need to perform all this operation and each and every life cycle stage for each and every type of risk. Doesn't sound quite easy, but it's something that organizations will need to face with the upcoming AI Act.
Thank you, Elena. And just to remind our audience here, if you do have questions for Elena and Peter, please do type them in the LinkedIn chat, and we'll get to those. Laura will read them out. For the time being, I'll abuse my privilege here and keep asking my questions. So I want to connect, Peter, what you said, and Elena, what you said just now. So if I'm an organization and I want to engage in responsible risk management for AI, I'm trying to deploy a new system. I want to make sure I engage in risk management in the way that the law expects me to. Is it clear from our current understanding of the AI Act when I've reached a state of having managed and treated my risks sufficiently, or is that still open?
Elena, the floor is yours.
In my opinion, it's an ongoing process that it's never ending. So the UAI Act talks explicitly about managing risk as a continuous process, and the way organizations should think about it, by the very nature of AI, is a continuous process, something that can be considered, treated in the design stage of an AI application, when then I go to deployment, might not be treated. So if I find that there's a risk of discrimination at the stage of deployment of this application, and I treat it by rebalancing my data set or doing something on my data, and then a few months later, I introduce new data into my application. I train the application with fresh, brand new data. Things might change, so I will need to retreat this risk. It's impossible as long as an application is live and not retired to consider a risk as closed.
Definitely, and I fully agree. Risk management, plan, do, check, act, the good old risk management and compliance management cycle. The problem is, what does it actually mean? What do I have to do? And I think some of the attendees of this webinar, they actually expect an answer. The problem is, if you go through the phases of the development until the deployment of an AI system. And AI system, the definition, as we mentioned, is very broad. It could be very simple statistical systems. It could be sophisticated neural networks. And from the very beginning, from the user interface to the bias of the training data, you always have technical standards to adhere to. And those technical standards, you can't just like neglect them and leave them out because your system was basically trained 2 years ago and there are new standards. And there will be dozens of new standards. They're currently under development at the ISO level, at the IEEE level, at the Senelec level. So there are currently, and the German government a couple of months ago, they published a very helpful tool of determining like with suggestions, not determining, but suggestions of which ISO or other international standard could apply to which phase. So for instance, user interface, you should, to avoid abuse of the system, you should adhere to some of the rules of this of these technical standards. If you don't, you won't be in compliance. Because at the end, if something goes wrong, you will face not just civil liability or like fines, but also maybe if something like really goes wrong, you might even face public prosecution. So there you have to defend yourself by saying, but guys, as it was always been the case with product liability, but I did everything right. I followed the technical standards. That was state of the art. But if you can't prove that, you will have a problem, a severe problem. And that's like leads me to, from my perspective, the most important point. The AI Act is not about the law. The AI Act is about following technical standards and checking whether I comply with those standards, which is basically what risk management in that field means. So unless you have an understanding of the system, you know what you're doing. Unless you have the people who know what they are doing, you can't do a proper risk assessment, and you will be in, as one says, like in deep shit, legal-wise. Because then you can't prove that you have done anything to avoid risk, to mitigate the risk. And there's so many like mandatory risk assessments already out there. We have the data protection impact assessment under the GDPR. We have the fundamental right impact assessment. If you're, for instance, a public institution or a bank providing certain services, then those are also mandatory. And you have the AI Act risk assessment, and those have to be done lega artis. Latin. So they also have to be state of the art. You can just fake your way until you make it. That might be true for OpenAI, but you as a deployer or even a manufacturer of those systems, if you are the one just using a model, fine-tuning it, using LoRa to make it work better, you will have all those obligations and you will have to be accountable for that.
So a question or an attitude that I've now seen maybe in the last couple of months from a lot of companies who use AI or maybe even have an AI-based product is, yeah, but am I really high risk? Do I really need to do all this? Especially, we're based in Switzerland, a lot of Swiss companies are saying, yeah, but let's wait what the Swiss government does. So if I'm a company, or maybe or maybe not, or it's not entirely clear if I'm really high risk, and maybe I'm not based in the EU. Maybe let's say I'm a Japanese company. I build my software, my product in Japan, and I want to, of course, bring this to market not just in Japan but globally, including in Europe. What do I need to do? Like, do I have to now accept that Brussels and some standards bodies are telling me how to build my software?
You're on mute.
Apologies for that. I'll take this, and then Peter for sure will give a broader answer than mine. But essentially, yes, you as a Japanese company should also follow the guidelines of the UI Act if you want to commercialize your product within the European market. As the GDPR, the UI Act has an extraterritorial nature, so even Swiss companies that think we are just based in Switzerland, there's not a specific legislation in Switzerland as yet, as long as they deal with the European market, they do have to abide to the requirements of the same.
I basically have nothing to add. The definitions under the AI Act are so broad that basically everything, even if you're like the input processing output, like just the output of your service AI system is being used within the European Union, that you would also fall under the regulation. The question of enforceability is a live question, so we're still trying to figure that out under GDPR. But in the end, if you want to have someone to buy your services, then you should adhere to the AI Act. You should follow the AI Act, because otherwise your customers could be liable for violations of the AI Act, and then they would sue you, and that's like definitely not the way to do business, I guess, at least not from the beginning. And for the question about like whether it's a high risk system, also same situation. Currently, there is no definite answer. You can do a risk assessment by yourself, like that's the kind of AI Act risk assessment. And discussing that with my fabulous colleague Thea, we figured out a way of how this is very likely to go forward. Like companies are very likely to take an easy way out by saying, okay, we did a kind of an assessment and we figured out that like we are definitely not high risk. Why would they think of themselves as providers or deployers of non-high risk system? Because they use contracts. Like they promise in marketing materials a certain way you could use their products. And on the other hand, if you're signing their terms and conditions, if you accept them, there will be certainly use cases excluded from the legitimate use that are super important for you, that you thought they were covered. So they will try to work out back-to-back agreements. That's why procurement of AI systems, like the legal part of the procurement, is so important. But also this type of like weaseling out of things worked under GDPR for a while. It won't work under the AI Act for a variety of reasons. We have kind of strong supervisory authorities. We have a public that is well aware of those situations. And we have a new instrument in Europe that went largely unnoticed and went into effect by the end of last year. And that's basically the like EU class actions. It's called Collective Redress Directive. And it enables NGOs and consumer protection organizations and competition protection organizations to go after companies that do not follow the law. And for instance, the AI Act will be a formidable tool to leverage to leverage these methods against big tech. So from my perspective, I would say it's not the individual suing the big company, it's not the fear of high fines, but it will be the power of the collective power of the consumers in Europe that will bring some of those companies into compliance. And that's something worth considering, because collective redress means you don't have to deal with one consumer. You could possibly have to deal with 20 million consumers. And that's definitely something that will change the landscape of compliance more than GDPR or the AI Act fines and the AI office will do.
So the big companies building the foundation models, the LLMs, were briefly mentioned earlier, and I want to go a little bit back to them, because my impression is that they were pretty successful in their lobbying efforts to make sure that they escape most of the scrutiny and most of the requirements, and essentially push the responsibility onto those companies who then, as you say, use GPT-4 or Bard or Gemini through an API. So the responsibility is with the person or the organization that builds with those tools. But I'm wondering, actually, now that we see more and more lawsuits also against the companies that provide those models, particularly on copyright grounds, whether if I go to my LLM provider of choice and build my AI application with that, might I be at risk of inheriting some of the copyright liability of the provider? How will that work?
This is a purely legal question, but from what I read of the AI Act and what I've seen is that as long as you put a substantial modification to the purpose or to the way an AI system is used, in your case, Kevin seems to fall within that, because I built my own application starting from the foundational model, then I'm completely put on the same ground as a builder of an AI application, of not only a deployer, but as a provider. So in that case, I expect that I will inherit the liability of the company that is producing the foundational model. Peter, I'm sure you have a more detailed stance on that.
It is so detailed that I'm not sure I can answer the question at the moment, because there are so many use cases, but there's also one not so detailed answer that is, of course, you're liable for everything OpenAI has done in the past, for what Anthropic has done, for using Midjourney or Dolly and all those models. There's an interesting development that some of the, I think, large part of the public didn't notice. They always, like, a lot of people thought like copyright is basically over. Wow, cool, now I can create things with those models and I won't be liable ever, because that's new and that's a pastiche under the EU Copyright and the Digital Single Markets Directive. But that's like not true. The AI Act does something very special, and I didn't notice that until very recently. Eleonora Rosati, professor of copyright law in Stockholm, told us about that. Basically, what the AI Act does is to extend the copyright regime, a very strict copyright regime of the European Union, to everyone who is in scope of the AI Act. Before that, we had purely national copyright laws, plus a couple of international conventions, Berne Convention, for instance. But now with the AI Act, everyone doing something in AI has to adhere to European copyright rules. And those rules are quite strict. There is, of course, a huge debate about whether there was some exception introduced in 2019, 2021, was called the text and data mining exemption. That was meant for extracting patterns and correlations, basically from text, maybe also from pictures. But it was never meant to be used as an exception to store data or large parts of the training data and to reproduce them. So currently, I haven't seen anyone in their right mind claiming that the TDM exception actually applies to deep neural networks and their reproduction of the training data. But what we see is like a lot of companies trying to put the blame on the users. So for instance, the defense in the OpenAI copyright cases and other similar copyright cases is, yeah, you prompted the model in a way that it reproduced the original training data, and that's a violation of our terms of service. That's bad for two reasons. One, you will never know whether your prompt creates something that violates other people's copyright because there is no reference to the original source. And two, even if something happens to your application of that model, to your implementation of that API into your system, you won't be able to sue OpenAI or Anthropic for copyright violation or for damages because you had to pay damages to someone there. So there is a lot of uncertainty going on. So the only way to escape that uncertainty is if you start developing your own models or your own fine-tuned models, or you just exclude certain use cases from your systems by introducing very rigorous policies into your company, or by setting up guardrails for the system, for your chatbot. There are only that many use cases currently for generative AI, unfortunately. But in the end, copyright will remain a live question, a problematic question. And I think that a lot of US companies are scared to death of the AI Act because of that. They try to lobby in a way that seemed to be working, but actually it did not work out that well. So copyright is the main concern of the AI Act. And even if it's hidden in the fine print, it is still there. And the publishers, the authors, the creatives, they are basically waiting for European decisions on that.
So you touch on a point that I wanted to raise as the next discussion item, which is this question of the European Union passed its landmark law today, but of course everyone is currently busy trying to regulate AI in some way or another. And I know it sounds like a joke, but even the Pope called for AI regulation. Let's exclude the papacy for a moment and ask the question to both of you, how you view the developments in the United States with the Biden executive order, with the attempts in the states to regulate AI, with the regulatory agencies pushing actually for enforcement already. I recently read an article saying that 44 out of the 50 US states are now pursuing their own AI laws. Are we going to have an absolutely intractable global mess of AI regulation? Is this going to be impossible for global companies to navigate, or where's the horizon here? Where's the light on the horizon in this emerging complex landscape?
Elena.
I let you the honor to start, and then I chip in.
I admire the US. They're being so pragmatic most of the time. Sometimes they're kind of fundamentalistic when it comes to certain types of, for instance, free speech, but in general, regulation, they're skeptical of broad approaches to regulation. So what we see now is the FTC, led by an extraordinary individual, Lina Khan, with a great team, with a strong understanding of technology and how markets work. That's very important. And they are enforcing existing laws. And they have, as far as I remember, ordered the disgorgement, the destruction of models with ill-gotten data from children, data from whatever, surveillance capitalism, basically. They ordered the destruction of those models. So we haven't seen that type of enforcement in Europe yet. But in the US, they are leading the way of enforcement, and they're like not scared of doing it. And they also held a lot of meetings about like also for audits, etc. Currently, what the FTC is doing is a bit questionable on whether they have the legal authority to do it under Section 5 of the FTC Act. With they can they can enforce against unfair and deceptive practices, and whether like data collection of a certain type, precise geolocation data, personal data that is sensitive in nature, whether this is a deceptive or unfair business practice. I mean, that remains up to the US courts to decide. But in general, their approach is, I think, admirable. They are doing the best they can with the existing laws, but also there are, of course, 30, 40, 50 different initiatives, bills on the table in the mostly in the different states, bills with funny names. I forgot most of them, unfortunately, but they have funny names, definitely. And those are sometimes aimed to mimic the AI Act or become a better version of the AI Act, as we have seen it in the past years with using the GDPR as a gold standard and then developing state privacy laws. But there is definitely a lot going on, but mostly sector specific, mostly on a state level. On the federal level, it is basically the FTC enforcing what they can enforce. So existing laws that have been around for 100 years.
Yeah, I can only say that I agree with what Peter said. And also, like the US has always had this very pragmatic approach. For example, in using AI application around HR cases, recruiting, etc., they have specific ways to measure whether a discrimination risk occurs and have a quantitative indicator of the potential for discrimination, which nowhere in Europe has been defined, which is the disparate impact. So it's surely a market that is very important to defining the global trends of regulation, but it has fundamentally a different approach from what we have in Europe. In Europe, we really need the regulation because what happens in court and the enforcement level is totally different from the United States. And also, their capability of really bringing to court and making a case for enforcing things in a certain manner is something that we in Europe wouldn't be able to do, also for cultural reasons. So I don't see it becoming a regulatory mess. It's just a different approach to the same problem, ending up with the same objective, which is that of protecting individual citizens and the society as a whole from potential harm stemming from the use of AI.
Definitely, and if I may add, on the enforcement side of the law, the US has always been stricter, more outgoing than Europe. So we have very strict laws, but we all know like the enforcement really depends on whether it's like correctly implemented in your member state, or like there are some member states that are protective with regard to their national champions. So what I found most interesting is that like there was one recent statement of Lina Khan and Alvaro Bedoya from the FTC about their Avast enforcement. So Avast is a basically UK-based company. They had a Czech subsidiary and they were selling browser information that they collected because they offered an antivirus service. So, and they told them to delete the data, to destroy the models, the ML models that were trained on that type of data. So currently, I mean, Avast, there hasn't been any enforcement action in Europe against Avast. There is a class action lawsuit in Belgium or the Netherlands pending, but so the US is leading the way. And what I find interesting is, since they also they also use some of the wording, the privacy impact assessments, the principles of necessity and proportionality. Even the FTC uses those words. I think there might be an unintended or at least a side effect of the AI Act, even if the AI Act is like really a difficult piece of legislation. With some ideas might be considered worth using even in the US. So the FTC might find some of that interesting and use it in their own enforcement, because their concept of unfair and deceptive is much broader and could entail also very specific provisions of the AI Act. For instance, transparency obligations.
So thank you both. I'll ask one final question, and then we should open it to the floor here. And that's, we picked as our title, Operationalizing the EU AI Act. So what would your top action items be, your advice be to organizations that know they use AI? And maybe they're not sure whether they're a high-risk application or not. What advice would you give the leaders of such an organization to start doing tomorrow?
Well, to start doing yesterday, to be more precise. It's a very long and complex process, because it doesn't only involve acquiring the right tools, creating an inventory of your AI application, but it also involves change management. It involves organization thinking about what are the roles, the responsibilities, and the type of accountabilities to govern this technology. Said it more broadly, they need to create a cooperative environment where they see AI development, deployment, and monitoring as a multi-stakeholder effort. You cannot do things in silos and in isolation anymore. So data science needs to constantly cooperate with risk management, with legal and compliance, and with business, to ensure that not only your AI application align with the requirements of the laws, including the AI Act, but also that align with the ethical objective that you as an organization set for those AI applications, with the business KPI you set for those AI applications. So my first advice would be to review the very fundamental way you think about AI, to make sure you understand as an organization that you need to avoid a silos view of AI as a technology, to create multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder committees to assess the risk and to treat them, and to acquire the right tools that allow this multi-operational, multi-stakeholder approach. So you will probably need to create a upper layer above your current systems that you use for AI development, that allows you to centralize all this activity, to create a central evidence repository where you keep track of all the actions that have been implemented, where you keep track of all the interaction among the different stakeholders. And only by doing so, by having the right technological tools, by having the right setup at the organizational level, you will be able to both align to the requirements of the regulation and make sure your AI application align to your expectation in terms of performance and ethical principles.
Wow. I mean, that's definitely a lot. And one thing that comes to my mind is the first thing you need is to build up a workforce, people who can populate all the fields in a software that could help you with keeping track of all the requirements. Because one of the problems is we still haven't figured out what all the requirements are, what they actually mean. I mean, there are words, but we have to fill the words with live. I'm live translating from German, so Worte mit Leben erfüllen. So that is super important. And there are not that many people available at the moment who understand AI. So you better start training them. You better start using the people around you, train them, make them understand how it works, and then start working. For instance, start with an inventory. It's not everything is about having very cool AI apps that can turn prompts into video. That's not it. Most of the tools, like 80% of the tools that we've been assessing that fall under the AI Act, are very very simple applications that use machine learning or statistics, but they are crucial to the development of, or like to the procurement, to just-in-time delivering products. We see dynamic pricing algorithms. For newspapers or magazines, it's their recommender systems that like do personalization, offer personalization services. So classification, if you want to know what to do exactly, just copy paste Article 9 and Article 10 of the AI Act into GPT and ask, give me a schedule of things to do. You will not be wiser with any of the responses that may come up, but you will understand the complexity of all of this. And therefore, it is important. Have someone read the AI Act. Have someone read the technical requirements. Start doing it now, because in a year from now, when a couple of the requirements will already be applicable to your systems, there won't be anyone on the market. And it's better you start trusting now. Trust your own people. Trust them with new tasks. Invest in training. And for the rest, start with bringing your procurement processes in line.
Yeah, Peter, if I can add to what you said, to build your workforce and start now. Well, companies that are starting now are creating effectively a competitive advantage for themselves, are allowing their stakeholders, investors, customers to trust them, to trust the reliability of their AI products and services. So if you don't start now and you lag behind, 1 year from now, maybe you're not there as a company anymore, because you lost the trust of your customers, you lost the trust of your investors, and you have nothing to abide to, because as a company, you're finished.
A bit drastic.
I'm drastic.
Given the experience we had with GDPR in 2018, I would say it is more likely that because of market dynamics, it will be that in 2 years from now, there will still be offers on the market, very expensive ones, but those offers are not high quality offers. And they will be like, if you hire us for the next 12 months, you pay us 500,000 euros, dollars, Swiss francs for performing sort of a like mood exercises on your data, on your systems. That won't lead to you being compliant, but that will provide you with a certain type of documentation. We saw that with maturity analyses under GDPR, like they were completely worthless. I already knew that like marketing had problems with data protection. I mean, wow, they figured that out. I'm not trying not to name and shame, even if it's like super difficult to avoid that at the moment, but those will be the offers at the time, but there won't be anyone offering you material compliance. You need the interdisciplinary team. You need to set it up now. You need to hire people. You might even need to, if you're in the field of, in the medical field, so medical device regulation, you might need to already book risk assessments under the Medical Device Directive, conformity assessments, hire people who can do that in a year from now or in 2 years from now, because they will be fully booked by the time you're looking for them in 24 months. That's like, be prepared. We also do that, like for again, maybe that's on a very personal note. The AI Act is a law, but it's not about lawyers. 10% of what's in the AI Act is actually legal stuff. The rest is, you need a technical standard, you need to comply with that standard, and the lawyer can, in the end, only assess whether compliance with a standard means compliance with the law. You can't ask your lawyer whether your system, your AI system, is a high-risk system. We can't do that. No. We can only tell you that if someone says that this is not a high-risk system, whether this assessment is in compliance with the law, not what's in the assessment, but whether the way it was done and whether it qualifies as a qualified opinion, whether it was done, whether it was state of the art. So that's all. So it's not the lawyers. You shouldn't have lawyers lead this project. Definitely not.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And sorry to interrupt you, but we have only 5 minutes, so I will start with the Q&A session. And I will start with this question. So would you suggest that companies based in Switzerland implement their AI based on the EU AI Act standard? And what could be the value of doing that?
I would suggest they certainly do, because even assuming that these are only Swiss-based companies, only dealing with Swiss customers, not exporting anything to Europe at all, at the moment, and as of today, the UI Act is the gold standard for AI regulation and is the one that addresses all the possible risk and harms stemming from the use of AI application in the respect of human fundamental rights. So for a Swiss company that bases their AI systems, their AI development on the UI Act, there's everything to gain. Also because most likely in the Swiss market, there's going to be a very similar law, just like it happened for the GDPR. So eventually also the Swiss market will be regulated. And in some sectors, there are already some signals of the need to put clear guidelines for AI governance. For example, FINMA has requested AI governance for financial institutions.
Which totally makes sense. Yeah. And I mean, you can't, sorry to say, but Switzerland is too small to think they won't be affected by new regulations, be it in the US or in the rest of the EU or the European Economic Area. It's impossible.
Perfect.
Kevin, do you want to add something? If not, I will move on to another question. Okay, so this is a long question. The AI Act defines an AI system is a machine-based system designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy, and that may exhibit adaptativeness after deployment, and that for explicit or implicit objectives infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs such as predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments. So what does this include? Linear regression, human design rule-based systems. From how many rules could a single if-then-else statement interpreted as AI according to this definition?
Shall I? It's
Yeah,
a very sophisticated question, but it boils down
is.
to the definition of AI in the UI Act. And yes, it's super broad. And as long as some sort of inference has been performed and input has been transformed into output with a certain level of autonomy, yes, you should assume that this is considered as AI. So even statistical type of application, even a simple linear regression with 3 variables is AI under this definition.
I agree. It also doesn't depend on the AI Act considers or thinks about risks. It doesn't matter whether the risk arises from a simple multiplication or something as linear regression. It's about the result. Like, what does it affect? Which type of physical or virtual environment is it going to affect? Are you going to fire a rocket with linear regression? Fine, then I think it would be high risk, but also out of scope of the AI Act because it's a military use. If you're trying to influence a virtual environment, such as a computer game, it's probably not a high-risk system, but it would still fall under the AI Act.
Yeah, and also it's important to notice that the UI Act clearly speaks about the overall decision process, not just the model per se. So if there's some human decision making on top of the output of an AI system, this is what you should consider for your risk-based assessment.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the pragmatism of the United States also, and there's been a move away from the term artificial intelligence and towards automated decision system, and I think that clears up a lot of the confusion.
Also, ADM systems have been around for a while as a term, even as a legal term. So I fully agree with that also. It prevents us from being disappointed if those systems don't turn out to be as intelligent as we were made to believe.
Okay, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we don't have more time. So let me share again my screen. Thanks again to Peter, Elena, and Kevin. And if you have more questions, here you can find the emails of Kevin, Elena, and Peter. And of course, I suggest you to follow Modulus because in the future we are going to host other webinars. And thanks to all the participants, and I wish you a very great afternoon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you.